Mark Devlin. Welcome to my channel. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I really do appreciate this.
Hello, Guy. No worries. Glad to be on.
How are you?
Well, that question's actually banned. I don't do "How are you" anymore. I'm actually going to get some T-shirts made, and it's going to have the slogan "How are you" and a big red line crossed through it because it's just a question that I hate, to be honest. And whenever anyone asks me how I am, I usually just say, "Well, I'm here."
It's funny, I put a post up on Facebook about a month ago saying it's okay to say you're not okay, and that we ask people if they're okay, if they're all right, or how are you? And we actually don't want really to hear anything other than I'm fine, thanks, how are you? We don't want to hear the reply.
Exactly that. And most people asking the question, I'm not suggesting this of you, but most people who say, "How are you?" don't really give a shit how you
Mm,
are. It's just something we say in polite society. And as you
yeah.
say, they're hoping for the answer, "I'm fine, thanks. And you?" What they don't want to hear is, "Oh, my life is just a total nightmare. There's so many things going wrong. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I just don't know what to do." And then they don't want you reeling off a long list of problems. That's the last thing they want you to come back with. So that's why the question, "How are you?" is totally redundant and totally irrelevant and totally worthless, in my view. And I
I,
would love to get to a state where people just don't ask that anymore. They find some other way of greeting people. And it's difficult. You meet someone, it's just so natural to say, "How are you?"
mm,
because we've
mm.
been conditioned to ask it. But I think there would be far more worthwhile ways of starting a conversation.
I spent quite a few years as well. I was a graphic designer and then I was a tattoo artist, and I raised quite a lot of money tattooing semicolons and little green love hearts representing mental health awareness, and raised thousands of pounds for Mind and the NHS Mental Health Trust. And the reason for my push on this post that I did about saying it's okay to say you're not okay is because when I ask someone, I am actually looking for them to say they're not, and then to try and help if I can. But people don't normally. They don't want to hear it. It's often it's an opportunity. If I ask you how you are, you can then offload onto me and then not ask me how I am. So sometimes it's just an offload for people.
Right. I'm sure often people aren't okay, but they
Mm,
hear the question, "How are you?" and they can't actually be bothered to get into it, or they don't want that kind of conversation. So just to move things along, they say, "Yeah, I'm okay, I'm fine," when they're anything but fine.
yeah, yeah, just dismiss it.
I'm sure that happens a lot.
So obviously you're a writer and a DJ, but when did your journey start?
Well, I've done a whole bunch of things in my time. So I started out working in supermarkets, shelf stacking actually, in my teenage years. But my first job was as a writer on a business magazine. So I learned how to write through that. And eventually I moved on to the music press. I worked for Blues and Soul magazine for some time. And I was always interested in music. I grew up as a kid listening to the radio and all the stuff that was in the charts. And eventually I decided I wanted to become a DJ, and so I pursued that career path. It wasn't easy. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy, but I'll give you the potted version, which is that I made it as a radio and club DJ, and that became my full-time job for many years. I was playing effectively black urban music, R&B and hip hop, reggae dancehall, this sort of stuff. And I was also a writer all the way through. And things got to round about 2008, and I started to have some really big questions about what was really going on in this world. Got there in the end. And I started to question the true nature of this reality, and specifically who was running this world, the different expressions of organized society. And so my research took me into the world of secret societies, the Freemasons, and all these other groups. And I came to realize that every aspect of our lives is controlled when you go far enough up the hierarchy by certain groups and networks. And they're directing every aspect of our lives. And that meant that, as well as through the world of politics and medicine and science and mainstream media and academia, this must be playing itself out through popular culture and entertainment, because these are the perfect vehicles through which to get mass mind control and the pushing of social engineering agendas done. And I knew that was happening all over. So I wanted to better comprehend how the music industry, of which I'd been a part, was used in this process. And that set me off on a path. I fell down about 5,000 different rabbit holes all at the same time. And I realized that I needed to be committing all my time and energy and resources towards researching this subject area and communicating my findings to others. And that's what led to the publication of my first Musical Truth book, which I put out in early 2016. So it's almost the 10th anniversary of that. And since then, I've done three more books delving into the true, shady, nefarious nature of the music business. And I've become known as the go to guy, I guess, for all this sort of stuff. I've done endless podcasts, don't even know how many interviews, hundreds, maybe thousands, public talks. And it's basically become my life to the point that I have no other life. This is just it. This is what I do. And I've been doing it for the best part of 20 years. And to be honest, I don't know how to do anything else now.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Your first book, that there were three volumes to that, weren't there?
Well, I've just put out my fourth volume in the
Right.
series. So it's called No One's Dad's a Plumber.
Yes.
And it reinforces this idea that so many musicians and public figures come from families where the father is connected somehow into military intelligence or expressions of the establishment or of government. What you find so rarely when it comes to musicians, household name artists, I'm talking, the really famous ones that we all know, is dads who had regular working class jobs like a plumber or a builder. You don't find that. What you do find is plenty of fathers who were governors, lieutenant colonels, generals, admirals, plenty of Freemasons, politicians, statesmen, these sort of jobs. And it presents the possibility, or I would say the revelation, that the reason these people are famous, the reason they were ushered into popular culture, the reason they became household names is entirely down to the families that they were born into. It's all to do with DNA, genetics, ancestry. That's the key to so much. So that's what coloured the title of that book, No One's Dad's a Plumber. But that's the fourth one in the series. So I've done four books now over the course of 10 years.
So where was it that you sort of stumbled across this information, or what drove you to dig? Because as soon as you said that, no one's dad's a plumber, and I heard you talking to Richard Vobes about that, my first, I suppose, thought was of Jim Morrison,
Hmm.
and perhaps a good example.
He is the classic example. He's the best example you can cite to naysayers and doubters. And of course, even then, they would say, well, the fact that Jim Morrison's dad was the Navy admiral in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag psyop that was used to justify America's escalation of the Vietnam War is entirely down to Jim uh, and the fact that Jim became a famous rock icon, who appeared to be completely at odds with his father's value system, was down to Jim being a rebel. And Jim just didn't approve of what his father was into. So in interviews, he used to say his parents were dead, even though they weren't. And this was Jim distancing himself from his dad by becoming anti war and anti establishment and pursuing the path as a famous rock icon that he did. But that is not the only example we have of the dynamic. It's the best known one because everyone's heard of Jim Morrison, and it's a fabulous story about his dad being a Navy admiral and stuff. But many people, and I encounter them all the time, would say that's what it comes down to. So then you hit them with all the other examples that we have, because there's no shortage of them. We find endlessly in rock music dads doing dodgy kind of jobs coming from espionage backgrounds and military intelligence backgrounds and such. There's no end to them. And a lot of what I learned about this came from the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which was published by David McGowan. He was an author and researcher who took it upon himself to do a deep dive into so many of the musicians and the bands that came out of Laurel Canyon, this neighborhood in the
Yeah.
Hollywood Hills in the mid to late 1960s. He realized that all the key instigators of the so called counterculture scene of those times were basing themselves for some reason in this area, Laurel Canyon. And when he went deep diving into what the fathers of these musicians did, he just found endless connections back into the world of the military and expressions of government and military intelligence. And that book is mainly what started me on this path of research myself. So it was a huge influence on me. And I thought, well, McGowan's obviously correct because all the information checks out, it's documented, you can look it up for yourself. If that dynamic was in place at that time in that neighborhood, it's probably present in other genres of music as well. Because if something works, it ain't going to get fixed. And that dynamic was working brilliantly at the time. So the controllers, the instigators, the architects of it would have wanted to roll it out elsewhere. And so I took on the task of researching other genres. And I started with punk and new wave. And then I
Right.
looked into hip hop because I'd been a part of the rap and hip hop scene as a DJ. And I wanted to understand better what was going on there, or comprehend, I should say. And then electronic dance music and rave and acid house, this sort of stuff. And I discovered through my research that yes, that dynamic was indeed present through all these different genres. You find it everywhere. And it just reinforces the notion that music is absolutely controlled and it's there to create certain perceptions and value systems on the part of the consumers. It's there for mass mind control. It's there to push agendas. That's the primary purpose of entertainment and popular culture. These things were not put into place by really nice people who want to uplift and enrich our lives because they care about us. No, we're talking about psychopaths and Satanists, unfortunately, who control all these institutions. And entertainment, popular culture, music provide the perfect vehicles to get all that done. Because when you think you're listening to a favorite piece of music, chilling out to an album, going to see a favorite band play, going to see a movie, watching a TV show, you think you're getting just some harmless fun and entertainment and escapism. The last thing anyone would imagine, unless they've done the research, is that they're getting mind controlled, hypnotized, and they're getting their entire worldviews shaped and molded for them by social engineers, behavioral scientists who lurk in the shadows but provide or channel all their expertise into things like movies and music. So when your guard is down, that's when your subconscious mind is wide open for manipulation. And that's where all the sorcery and the dark magic happens.
Is there any recording artist out there or band out there that would surprise people to know that it has a more darker foundation?
Well, this band will probably surprise people. And it's only speculation and a theory on my part. But how about Abba? Would anyone
Wow.
suspect that Abba were into dodgy stuff? There is some suspect symbolism in some of their artwork. And then when you consider the naming of the group, ABBA, we're told that it's the initials of the first names of the band members, Anna-Fried, Agnetha, Bjorn, Benny. But ABBA in Hebrew means father. So it's a Hebrew word and it ties into Jewish mysticism. And when you look at some of their sleeves, you've got things like pyramids and some of these methods of occult communication. But I think ABBA were being used to push social engineering agendas when they came out in the 1970s. And I think the main one was the normalization of the idea of divorce. Because what it all boils down to in terms of what many of these social engineering agendas were all about, and particularly going back to that 1960s counterculture, flower power hippie scene, there were so many social changes going on at that time. And the popular culture at that time, the movies, psychedelic culture and lifestyles, these music festivals, and the music itself was being used to create new ideas about all kinds of things about family, sex, drugs, the young people of the time, and the way they fitted into the society of their parents' generation. What all that was about was destroying traditional family values. The social engineers had waged war on the concept of family. Because up until the mid 1960s, the idea of family communities was still very much a thing, and a lot of emphasis was placed on it. And families tended to stick together a lot more and support each other and be more unified. And all the social engineering that was being done was designed to destroy all of that and to pit one generation against the value system of the other. So the young people of the time were being made to feel totally alienated from the more conservative, traditional perspectives and viewpoints represented by their parents' generation. So if we accept that that was what was going on in the 60s, and something's got to explain why all the LSD and all the other mind altering drugs came along at the time, exactly the same time as the birth control pill arrived, exactly the same time as feminism and women being entrained to see themselves as equals to their males and therefore getting into the workplace and taking on all these jobs that men were doing, which was taking them out of the home, away from traditional nurturing roles of motherhood, putting their children into state child care at ever earlier ages where the indoctrination can begin. If we accept that's what was going on in the 60s and it was all about breaking up the traditional family unit, then we can extend that out to the idea of marriage, the institution of marriage. And in the 1970s, the idea of divorce was still fairly taboo.
Yeah.
Not many married couples
Mm.
ended up getting divorced. But what if the social engineers of the time wanted to create more chaos and disruption in society by having more marriages come to an end, with all the trauma and all the pain that that creates, particularly for children who might have been involved, in a marriage. Watching their parents get divorced is a traumatic thing. And the dark occult controllers that we have get off on all of that. They love pain and suffering and
Yeah.
hardship. They love cultivating that stuff. So, what if the idea of divorce was getting normalized through the songs of Abba, a hugely popular group in the 1970s? Popular everywhere, really big in Australia. Australia loves Abba. And you had the two couples in the group who were married, and they went through very high profile divorces during the heyday of the group, and they
Yeah.
put it in their songs. So fans of the group were watching these two marriages dissolve, and the songwriters were putting it into their songs. The winner takes it all, and One of Us, and Knowing Me, Knowing You. And these songs were all about the breaking down of a relationship, and it becomes unsavable. And so, what's that doing to the public that are looking on? It's normalizing the idea of this sort of thing happening. It's more likely for them to accept that it's just the way it goes, it's a fact of life, marriages break down, even singer songwriters and musicians aren't immune from it. Even ABBA are going through this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it was. It was very subtle, it was drip feeding this idea into the subconscious mind of the masses. And that, you could argue, is a nefarious aspect of ABBA because they were used for social engineering. So that's a group that I think might surprise people. And there will be many others. What about Barry Manilow? I mean, Barry Manilow is the housewife's favorite.
Absolutely. Yeah.
People
I
wouldn't
grew up.
imagine that he was into any dark stuff, but he put out a track called I Write the Songs.
Yeah.
And in it, he's talking about he writes songs that manipulate people's emotions.
Yeah. Make them cry. Yeah.
Yeah. And they change people's perceptions of things.
Mm.
And that put me in mind of a movie called Under the Silver Lake, which came out a few years ago, starring Andrew Garfield. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to have
Well,
to now.
yeah, right. That's the homework. So it's quite surreal and it's very allegorical. But at the end of this movie, or towards the end, Andrew Garfield's character encounters this old man, this wizened, wrinkled old man, all sort of emaciated and desiccated. And he sat there at a piano in this large room. And this old man claims that he is the one that wrote so many of these famous rock and roll songs, decade after decade. And he starts playing them out on the piano. And he said, I wrote this song and it had this reaction. Then I wrote this song. And he said the songs were put out there to manipulate people's emotions and get them thinking a certain way, behaving a certain way, taking on certain perceptions. And that seems to be echoed in this Barry Manilow song, where he's taken the position of this guy that writes all the songs that change the way the world feels about things. So you could argue that that's a side to Barry Manilow that people wouldn't necessarily expect to find. And so there'll be many other acts who hide behind this genial, easygoing persona. What about Paul McCartney? I can't ever do a podcast without mentioning Paul McCartney. Or we can
Yeah,
call him Billy
Billy
Shears,
Shears.
right? If you accept that that's not the original Paul McCartney and there's a guy
Mm,
named William Shepherd or Billy Shears that's been playing the public role of Paul McCartney, well, he's all sort of thumbs up and smiley when you
mm,
see him in public and stuff. But some of the songs that are credited to him are quite dark or have dark overtones. What about Helter Skelter, the song that appeared on the
yes.
Beatles' White Album in
Now that was one
1968?
of my favourite songs
Oh, yeah?
until recently. Yeah, that was one that not many people knew,
Hmm.
but I always enjoyed.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite trippy and psychedelic and full of high energy. But that song is cited as having been an influence in Charles Manson and his disciples and those murders which supposedly happened. I say supposedly because we can't be
Mm.
sure of anything
No,
anymore. But
no.
the so called Tate Manson murders, Manson and his followers are said to have been influenced to commit those murders largely by the song Helter Skelter, Paul McCartney song. And many people might say, oh, that's just a distraction or it's part of the psyop. But either way, it's a side to Paul McCartney, which a lot of people would not expect to find. You know, he's thought
Yeah.
of as putting out really nice songs, Rupert and the Frog chorus, and all these lovely songs, you know. But there's definitely a darker side to him, which is expressed through some of his music.
Yeah, well, Live and Let Die would be a good example of that.
Right. That sounds like a eugenicist's manifesto, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah. Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
the way these psychos think: live, us, and let die, them.
Yeah. And obviously there's connections between Billy Shears, William Wallace, Braveheart. They say that he's a descendant from Braveheart. But the connection with him to the Ashers and also obviously Tavistock
You've been
appears.
talking to Dom and Chris, haven't you?
No, I haven't. I haven't spoken to them for a few months now.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, but
Because Dom's all over Asher research, Asher
right.
genealogy, and where Jane Asher came from, and
Mm.
why she was put together with Paul McCartney, the original one, presumably.
Yeah, because something quite disturbing took place in the house. Didn't the man that we're going to sort of say is Paul McCartney? He was with Jane Asher, wasn't he? And did something happen in the basement there? There was something quite strange took place.
Yeah, well, this is Dr. Richard Asher, who was the father of Jane Asher. So Jane was a child actress, and then she went on to star in movies like Elfie with Michael Caine.
Mm,
And she got into a relationship with Paul McCartney. We can assume it's the original one, I guess, for the sake of this show. But Jane's father, Dr. Richard Asher, was involved in seemingly mind control research. He
mm,
worked at the General Middlesex Hospital, and then he left his hospital post and based himself in his home in Wimpole Street, London W1. So it was the Asher family household which doubled as Dr. Richard's clinic. And reportedly, he was researching hypnosis and deep sleep states and the way certain thoughts could be implanted into a subject's consciousness while they slept. He was married to Margaret Elliot, who is descended from the Elliot family bloodline, T.S. Eliot. And, Dom and Chris will take you through the ancestry there. And Matt Sergiu, who's the proprietor of the Occult Beatles site, and he's my co host on the Magical Mystery Talk podcasts, knows a whole lot about this as well. They've looked into Margaret Asher. But basically, she was a student of classical music and world music. She was a music teacher. She taught George Martin, the fifth Beatle, so called, the Beatles
yes.
producer, how to play oboe. She was his music teacher. And she would have been very familiar with world music as part of her role. So we get this story of Paul McCartney, and again, we'll assume it's the original one, who was living at Wimpole Street in the Asher family home with Jane and with Richard and Margaret, waking up one morning with the song Yesterday in his head. So he's said in multiple interviews, I just woke up one morning, had this song, came to me while I slept. I bashed it out on the piano, played it to a few friends, said, have you heard this song? They said no, because he thought he might have plagiarized it from somewhere. And so he put it out there as Yesterday. In recent times, an Italian musician by the name of Lily Greco has come forward to present an original composition which dates back to, I think, 1895. And it's an Italian aria. Can't remember the name of it. It's in Italian. There's a video that you can get of him on YouTube performing this song, originally composed in 1895. And the melody is virtually identical to Yesterday. So, what if Dr. Asher was using Paul McCartney as a test subject for his work into deep sleep hypnosis and what could be implanted into someone's thoughts while they slept? What if he selected a piece of music with which his wife, Margaret Elliott, the music teacher, would have been familiar, this Italian aria? He put it into Paul's mind while he slept. Paul woke in the morning with this melody in his mind, not knowing where it came from, but thinking he'd composed it himself. And so it gets put out there as Yesterday. Footnote to the story is that in 1969, trying to think of the date, was it? It was later in 1969. Paul had split from Jane Asher and he'd married Linda Eastman. Epstein was the original family name before it got changed to Eastman. I'll leave that one there. So Paul had split with Jane, and later in 1969, Dr. Asher went missing. Oh, it was May, I remember. Early May, round about the time of 1st of May, May Day, Beltane, which is an important ritual date in the occultists' calendar. So Dr. Asher went missing. Family didn't know where he was. They searched the house from top to bottom, nowhere to be found. Round about a week later, his body turns up in the basement, which they'd already checked,
Yeah.
and a bottle of pills was by his side. Verdict, I think you can see this one coming,
Mm.
suicide. So it seems that Dr. Asher had outlived his usefulness, and it seems highly likely that he was offed. And it's a reminder to never get into bed with Satanists and psychopaths because you never know when they're going to turn on you. They seem to have no problem with throwing one of their own under the bus when it
Mm.
suits them. P.
Yeah,
Diddy,
absolutely.
anyone? Tim Westwood, anyone?
Tim, I used to be friends with him.
Did you really?
Yeah, I worked on a show with him called Pimp My Ride.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
You were
spent
on
some
that
time
show.
with him. Yeah, well, it was my company did all the electronics. I founded. I was, as I said, I was a graphic designer, and I started designing the adverts for the back of a magazine called Max Power. And through that, I started importing a car alarm to the UK called Clifford. And we were dabbling with all sorts of things, getting engines to start from a remote control. And Pimp My Ride wanted to get involved, and they were working with the company I was buying from out in the States, where the show started with Exhibit. So they did it here with Tim Westwood, asked me to get involved. I wrote with him a bit for Max Power. And yeah, I spent some time with Tim and worked. We worked on a few of his cars, and I went to a
Wow.
party with him, and he introduced me to this unknown up and coming star, um, and that was Dizzy Rascal. And then
Okay.
obviously everything came out about Tim Westwood, and I've not spoken to him in years. But I'm going back to Asher. I read somewhere that the autopsy was conducted on his body by the same person that also did Jimi Hendrix and several other well-known figures.
Yeah, that's right. It's in my book. I can't remember the name of the guy, but we get this a lot when famous people turn up dead in suspicious circumstances. It's always the same old names that are called on to do the autopsy. So obviously tried and
Yeah,
tested from the Brotherhood,
yeah,
part of the same hierarchy. So a safe pair of hands to make sure
yeah,
that the official narrative stays on script.
yeah, absolutely. So what else have you uncovered? I mean, obviously Tavistock is for me is absolutely fascinating. And when I found out about Billy Shears and Paul McCartney, the Beatles, perhaps one of the more famous bands surrounded by this mysticism and so many different conspiracy theories attached. But is there another one out there that surprised you? Abba surprised me, but was there one that really made you sit back and think?
I would probably have to go back to rap and hip hop again because that was the
Mm,
genre that I knew so well. I was totally absorbed in the culture. For 20 odd years, I was a DJ and I traveled around all over the place, got gigs all up and down the UK. I played internationally as well. And the whole culture, the lifestyle, the music was the only thing that mattered to me for 20 odd years. And I have to say, be honest about it, Tim Westwood was a big influence on me. He was a
yeah.
DJ I looked up to. I saw him as a white guy that had made it big in a black music field, and I wanted to emulate that. Stupid of me, naive, but at the time I knew no better. And I realize now that he was a gatekeeper that had been placed into the scene.
Mm,
So he was representative of the establishment that wanted to use rap and hip hop and the associated culture for social engineering purposes. So they wanted one of their own, a tried and trusted candidate to be atop that scene, and that was his role. They did the same thing in reggae music with David Rodigan, who, like Tim Westwood, is white, public school educated, from a well to do, wealthy family, military family in his case. And so I didn't know any better. But recently, I've witnessed hip hop just completely coming undone at the seams. And it's quite a bewildering thing. So we've had the revelations about P. Diddy
mm,
and the jailing of P. Diddy. And what he's gone to jail for and been charged with is, from my research, only the tip of the iceberg. He was into a whole load more stuff. So I think the official charges were like human trafficking, uh, running a prostitution racket, that sort of thing. But the case never addressed him running a sort of blackmail operation, similar to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing
yeah.
in his
Mm,
mansions with these wild parties, which he referred to as freak offs, where rich,
mm,
famous, powerful people would be in attendance. They would get up to who knows who with who knows what, and it would all get filmed. And then that footage would be used as leverage to make sure they stayed on script and never said anything they're not supposed to say. That would appear to be what Diddy was doing in his various parties. And he had such control over rap and hip hop back in the day. In the 90s, when I got started in the game, he was just so influential and he was a gatekeeper. You know, uh, he was very responsible for the direction that hip hop lyrics went in. So at the start of the 90s, that art form was very meaningful and there were empowering messages getting put out there. The music actually meant something. But by the time of the murders of Tupac in 1996 and Notorious
mm.
B.I.G., who was supposedly Puffy's friend, Diddy's friend, that was clearly a sacrifice. It was clearly a ritual
Yeah.
murder.
The date as well, I think, was significant.
Yeah, it was 9th of March,
Mm,
97. And so from that point, you witnessed rap and hip hop really going down the shitter rapidly.
mm,
And the lyrics had changed from anything that might have been meaningful to the pushing of materialistic lifestyles, bling, champagne, gold rims on your Jeep, gold necklaces, all this absolute nonsense, fur coats. And Puffy was rocking all of that. And he steered all of rap and hip hop culture in that direction. So I've had to deal with coming to terms with the true nature of Puffy and what he was up to. Similar accusations have been leveled at Drake, who's arguably the most prolific rapper right now. He seems to have escaped scrutiny largely, but there were stories circulating a few months ago about Drake being involved in some of the same stuff that Puffy was, allegedly. And a lot of that was coming from Kendrick Lamar, who was another rapper who was putting out songs like Not Like Us and Meet the Grahams, which were directly accusing Drake of some really bad stuff. He's got a lyric in there about you're going to choose a chord and it's probably A minor. And what he means is a minor because you
oh,
like a minor, and all sorts of
mm,
other lyrics. These are there in Kendrick Lamar's songs. So, that's where to find it. Then there's Africa Bambaataa, who is credited with being
crikey.
one of the founding fathers of hip hop culture. There are three legendary figures in the game. So you've got Grandmaster Flash, who invented the art of turntablism. You've got Cool Herc, who invented the idea of block parties, sound systems, that aspect of hip hop culture. And then you've got Africa Bambaataa, real name Lance Taylor, who's credited with inventing hip hop culture or the lifestyle elements that go on top of the music. And so a few years ago, getting on for 10 now, actually, a couple of men. accused Bambaataa of having sexually molested them when they were minors. And then the Universal Zulu Nation, which Bambaataa founded and which was a worldwide movement by that point, basically came forward and admitted that Bambaataa had been into this stuff. And other people came forward and said that he'd been abusing young boys and stuff. Now, he's escaped any kind of justice. He's still walking around a free man. But again, it's another sordid aspect to the story. Then there's R. Kelly, the R&B singer.
Mm, yeah.
He was closely linked to hip hop culture because R&B and hip hop sort of went together. He married the singer Aaliyah when she was 15 and he was 20 something. And that marriage had to be annulled. And then a few years later, Aaliyah died in a plane crash, which bears all the hallmarks of being another sacrifice. R. Kelly went to jail a few years ago, and he was accused of running an empire quite similar to Diddy's, which involved slavery, the keeping of women as sex slaves, basically a harem and a kind of mind control cult that he was running. And he got put away for many, many years for that. We've got the charges now against Tim Westwood, 4 counts of rape. Those are the official charges. And the case goes to magistrates court on the 10th of November. Be watching that one like a hawk.
Yeah.
And, you know, all these accusations of Westwood being into all this stuff with young girls. And it's all left a really sour taste in my mouth when it comes to the whole of hip hop culture. And
Mm,
I've not really listened to rap music for many, many years because it's not what I thought it was. The whole scene is not what I thought it was. There were agendas running beneath the surface. And when I take it back to the early days of hip hop culture, there are some disturbing things. I find names like Grandmaster Flash, Grandmaster Melly Mel, Grand Wizard Theodore. And these are all titles that seem to come out of Freemasonry.
absolutely. Yeah.
And there's a lot of Freemasonic imagery, black and white checkerboard floors everywhere. KRS-One, who's one of the
Hmm.
early sort of pioneers of hip hop culture, said when he was asked, "Are you a Freemason?" "No, I'm not, but I know a lot of Freemasons and they share with me their secrets and I've been raised with their knowledge." Well, doesn't that make you a Freemason then? Because
Yeah.
Freemasons only share their knowledge with those who are part of the fraternity.
Yeah, there's a price to pay for sharing that knowledge, which I was told when I joined. Yeah, I mean, I left a long time ago. They wouldn't have me back. But yeah, you don't share certain
Lucky
things. But
escape, mate.
yeah, I mean, I joined because I wanted to find out occulted history. I wanted to know more about King Solomon. Where do we come from? Who runs the show? Maybe I'd find out who built the pyramids, who really built them, and
Who
but that
assassinated Kennedy?
yes, yeah. Well, I saw footage of his wife doing the job, um, um, but I when you started talking about hip hop initially, then, and about the beginnings and the background of these people, the first band or group, if you like, that came to my mind was the Beastie Boys. We weren't expecting that.
Mm.
Quite middle class white guys.
White, Jewish.
Yeah, yeah, I went to see them. Yeah, years ago, mid 80s. And I was a huge fan, but now thinking back, that one should be ringing alarm bells.
Yeah, I don't really know what the deal was with the Beastie Boys. They were possibly gatekeepers because, let's be honest, white Jewish people run the music industry. That's
Mm,
not any kind of out of turn statement. It's a
no.
fact. It's a
Mm,
fact. They run Hollywood movies, they run the music industry. You've got Leo Cohen, who has
mm,
been the most powerful figure in hip hop music for decades now. And he's obviously Jewish. And he's been quite open in interviews. He said that it's just something that we do. Jewish people have always run the music industry. They ran jazz back in the day, and now they run hip hop. So the Beastie Boys having been inserted into the culture could be an expression of them being gatekeepers, there to sort of steer things off in a certain direction. One of them died a few years ago,
yes. Yeah.
before his time. Ad Rock, was it?
Mm.
So that's a strange one. But I don't know. I was never really into the Beastie Boys, to be honest.
Who were you into when you first got into hip hop and rap? Was there one particular artist that really got you?
One of my favorites was always Guru of Gangstar. I loved many of their lyrics, and then Guru had a solo career and he put out a lot of great message music, and it didn't end well for Guru. So he split with DJ Premier, who'd been his partner in the group Gangstar. They had a disagreement, falling out, went their separate ways, and Guru hooked up with this guy called Solar, or super producer Solar. His words, not mine. That's the way Solar used to refer to himself. Real name John Mosher. And Solar appears to have had a really negative influence on Guru, on his remaining career. He absolutely took control of every aspect of his artistry and allegedly, seemingly, exerted some sort of black magic power over him, some sort of witchcraft. Because Guru ended up falling into a coma in very strange circumstances and went to hospital and just lived out his days in this coma. And Solar was trying to stop members of his family from seeing him. He was claiming that Guru had written a letter handing over complete control of his career, his music publishing, all his albums to him, Solar, but he wouldn't produce the letter. And he was claiming that Guru had said he didn't want to see any of his family members. He wanted only Solar to visit him. I document all this in Musical Truth Volume 1. And Guru ended up passing away in 2010. It was the 20th of April, which is one of these interesting dates, the day before Prince passed away in 2016, in very strange circumstances. So many unanswered questions about Solar and this dark power that he seemed to exert over Guru. And because Guru wasn't a high profile rapper, he's not out there like Jay-Z or Drake or somebody like that. Most people have never heard of him. This story has just kind of fallen by the wayside. I
Yeah.
think if it had not been Guru who had died in those strange circumstances and it had been, let's say, Jay-Z, people would be looking for answers
Mm.
and a lot more scrutiny would be getting placed on Solar. But because it was Guru, most people don't really care about him. Most people don't really care about rap and hip hop, to be honest. I mean, I put out a lot of information about the music industry, and I see people's eyes start to glaze over when I start talking about hip hop because most of these people just were never into it. And they think, oh, I don't know these names. I don't know these people. I'm not really interested. So it seems Solar got away with a lot when it comes to that story. And Guru was one of my favorite artists. But other hip hop groups that I used to enjoy, Pete Rock and CL Smooth, love them. Main Source, A Tribe Called Quest,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can I kick
loved,
it?
yeah, loved all of
Mm.
them.
Mm.
I was never so much into De La Soul. I think De La Soul were hugely overrated.
Right.
They were lauded as this wonderful group. I liked A Tribe Called Quest, but I never really went for De La Soul. But those would be some of the names that I used to lap up back in the day.
Well, De La Soul were obsessed with the number three, weren't they? 3 feet high and rising, and
Mm,
three's the magic number. And it
yeah,
was all
there's three
there.
of them.
Yeah, but at the time it was kind of I saw that as happy because my I suppose my as I said first concert I ever went to was Run DMC with the Beastie Boys supporting them,
Mm,
and I had to take a day out of school, bunk off school to go and watch them at Brighton. Missed the bus or the train home and had to sleep on a deck chair on the pier, and then
happy
ex
days.
yeah, and then the next one was Public Enemy, and I was listening to LL Cool J and
Mm,
NWA,
yeah.
and but also Will Smith, Fresh Prince, and DJ Jazzy Jeff. I
Mm.
was really into that, and obviously Will Smith now, if he was hosting an event a mile away from me, I'd only go there if I had a box of eggs, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but where are you with the conspiracies surrounding Tupac, for example? A lot of people saying that he was an FBI informer, or a stooge, or a plant, and some people saying that he never died and he's been spotted in places like Cuba. Where are
Mm.
you with that?
Yeah, it's always Cuba, isn't it?
Mm.
Elvis Presley's the bartender, probably. And Jimi Hendrix is cleaning the toilets. Well, I personally do think that Tupac was a plant. I think he was inserted into the culture because they wanted to change things, the controllers. Tupac was an actor, literally an actor. And as people probably know, his mother, Afeni Shakur, was a high profile Black Panther activist
Yes.
back in the day. But Tupac was trained in the performing arts, and it was all kinds of arts. He studied ballet, he was a dancer, and he learned how to act and how to sing. And when he emerged with his tough guy image, thug life, and all this, and he was
Mm.
being put out there as this gangster rapper, and he was putting out these really harsh lyrics, and he was going up against Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, with all these threats, saying, I effed your wife and all this, and
Mm.
your fat mother effer, and all this sort of stuff. It always smacked to me of being an act. Tupac never came across convincingly as a tough guy to me. He was an actor.
Mm.
I've seen him in films where, he wasn't doing that tough guy act. He was in Poetic Justice with Janet Jackson. And he was in a film called Gridlocked with
Hmm.
Tim Robbins. But I've seen footage of him when he was dancing in a bloody, a tutu or whatever. And I just think that he was given a role which was to be this thug life rapper to help foment the East Coast West Coast beef within hip hop
Yeah.
in the mid 90s. And that paved the way for the murder of the notorious B.I.G. So I think the real victim in all of this was Biggie Smalls,
Mm.
because I think he was taken out. And that was a ritual slaying, sacrificial murder. And part of the reason it happened was because the fires had been stoked between these rival camps within hip hop. So you had the East Coast scene, which was spearheaded by P. Diddy, there he is again, with Biggie Smalls as the prominent rapper. And they were continually taunting the West Coast fraternity, headed up by Suge Knight, Death Row Records. He was like the Puffy of the West Coast. And Death Row was pushing gangster rap as a big genre that was coming through and a lot of the lyrics of their artists. And Tupac was their main artist. And Tupac was taunting Biggie Smalls. Tupac and Biggie had been friends. They'd grown up together, knocked around together, but then for some reason they became mortal enemies. And so there was all this division within the culture, which up to that point had been all about unity and togetherness and pushing quite a lot of positive messages. But the East Coast West Coast thing came along, and it was founded on violence and intimidation and crime. And it was taking the whole gangster rap genre just a stage further. And then, like I said earlier, with the murder of the notorious B.I.G., you had the introduction of bling culture, largely at the hands of Puffy. So, is Tupac still alive? Well, I think it's quite possible. We're told, first off, he was shot in November 1994 outside Quad Recording Studios in New York, we're told. And Tupac always claimed that Biggie and Puffy had set him up. So he went into the lobby of this recording studio where he was due to do a track with Biggie. And he was set upon as he went to get in the elevator, and he was shot quite a few times. But he survived. And he went up in the elevator and went into the recording studio. And he always said the look on their faces was all he needed to know, that it was a setup, just this ashen look of shock, like they didn't expect him to survive. And then we're told that Tupac was shot in a drive by shooting in Las
Yeah.
Vegas on the 7th of September 1996. And he was shot multiple times, but he survived. And it took him 6 days to die. He went to hospital, and only on the 13th of September did he die. So it's pushing this idea that he was really, really tough. He could be shot all these times and he still survives for several days. And I just don't think he was that tough. He
Mm.
never came across as a tough guy. It all seemed fabricated, it all seemed like an act. And so I think it's quite possible that he never died when we're told he did. People think claims like that are outrageous when they first hear them. But I think there's all kinds of reasons to suspect that certain individuals don't die when we're told they did. So
Yeah.
Jim Morrison, we mentioned him earlier,
Yeah.
got my doubts about him.
Yeah.
We're
Me
told he
too.
died at the age of 27 in the bathtub in his Paris apartment. If anyone was ever going to tick the boxes for someone that could fake their death and be allowed to fade off into the shadows and assume a new identity, wouldn't it be Jim Morrison?
Mm.
based
Yeah,
on who his
absolutely.
dad was and all those high level military connections that he had.
Mm.
Then there's Elvis Presley. I've got my doubts that Elvis actually died when we're told he did in 1977 at the age of 42 on the toilet. Elvis had intel connections. According to some researchers, he was actually a spy and he was traveling around gathering information on organized crime gangs and reporting it back to the FBI and various police departments that he had affiliations with. So, if that's the case, wouldn't Elvis be someone who would be able to fake his death and fade off into the shadows?
That
And then
kind of
Tupac,
connects
if,
to,
if sorry,
sorry.
if Tupac was doing the bidding of the controllers as well, and his whole music career had been an act, then wouldn't he also be a candidate for being allowed to fade off into the
Mm.
shadows? I think he would.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for the last few years, at least, there's been a lot of video footage circulating about Pastor Bob Joyce.
Mm.
Obviously you've seen it, and I've analysed this over and over and over again. The more I look at it, the more I see him. But maybe that's what I'm hoping to see.
Yeah, that's a really tantalizing one.
Mm.
I actually met Priscilla a couple of weeks ago.
Oh
Priscilla
wow.
Presley, Elvis's former wife. She was doing a meet and greet in London, and I got to meet her. It's the second time I've met her, actually. And she was close, she was surrounded by gatekeepers and handlers and managers and stuff. And they were obviously there to make sure no unwanted conversations went on. But I
Mm.
was very tempted to say to her, "What do you think about Pastor Bob Joyce?" just to see
Mm.
what her reaction would be. Didn't really ask the question. But when I look at Pastor Bob Joyce, I do see a lot of things that make me think this could possibly be Elvis Presley. He does look like him. He does sound like him. He sings Elvis songs in his church congregations. And he laughs in the same way as well.
Yeah,
Elvis
he
had a
does.
very distinctive laugh, and Pastor Bob Joyce chuckles in the way that Elvis used to.
Mm.
But then you consider that if Elvis were still alive, he would be 90, and Pastor Bob Joyce is supposed to be in his early 70s. He doesn't look 90.
No.
Also, Pastor Bob Joyce seems a little too short. Elvis was quite tall, Bob Joyce quite a bit shorter. So, those are a couple of spanners in the works. I really want it to be him. I really want
Mm.
Pastor Bob Joyce to be Elvis, but there's these things we have to overcome, the age problem and the height problem.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I'm with you on that. I would love it to be him because I've seen him giving sermons where he said, I used to have all this money, I used to have a gold jacket, and and he's actually come out and said, forget about Elvis. I am me. I am Bob Joyce, and I don't know, but maybe like you said, maybe I just want it. I want it to be him.
Exactly. Or maybe some of these people are put out there to muddy the waters, to
Mm.
deliberately confuse the issue, and to make researchers like me look crazy. So
Mm.
if I make some sort of claim that somebody might be somebody else or not who you think they are, if it can be shown that they're not that person, it makes any claim that it could be sound ridiculous
Yeah,
in the minds of regular people, the masses.
yeah,
And maybe a lot of this gets done to devalue and discredit the work of genuine researchers like me and so many others who are trying to get to the bottom of these things, the truth of it all. I think
yeah,
a lot of diversion goes on, a lot of dead ends, a lot of deliberate cul-de-sacs and diversion tactics.
yeah. I think you're right. Where are you with the selling of the soul?
Well, it's a very real thing. People
Mm.
talk about it as if it's metaphorical and it just means, oh, you sign up with a record company and you take all the money and they tell you what to do. Yes, that goes on, clearly. But I think there's a very literal sense in which soul selling occurs. And it goes back to this famous myth of Faust, the Faustian bargain. This story, which involved this wealthy guy from high society who had everything in life that a man could desire, but he lacked knowledge about the things that really matter. What are these lives? What is this world? What's it all about? And in the story, he makes a deal with the devil, with this entity, whereby he gives up his mortal soul in exchange for the great worldly wisdom that he's seeking. And the Faustian bargain has come to be adopted in the music industry as a common myth or trope. And it goes all the way back to Robert Johnson, the blues
Yes.
musician in the 1930s. So Johnson was somebody who is said to have gone to the crossroads,
Mm,
this remote desert location. And the crossroads is an allegory for where this apparently physical material world interacts with the spirit world, and crossovers between the two can occur. And Johnson is said to have met the devil at the crossroads, and Johnson gave up his soul in exchange for great musical proficiency. And from that point forward, he became one of the most accomplished blues guitarists.
yeah.
Great talent. And people at the time put it down to his having made a deal in exchange for these talents. Robert Johnson died at the age of 27. Hard to believe, I know. He was seemingly poisoned. The story goes that he was messing about with this woman, married woman, and the husband arranged for him to be poisoned. And he died in great agony, howling like an animal, so the stories go. So that one didn't end well. And the idea of selling your soul has cropped up throughout music history. And so many artists are said to have taken that kind of deal. The song Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, which is the first record I ever bought at the age of 5, so
Wow.
saved up my pocket money and begged my parents to buy it for me. That song, which is coming up to its 50th anniversary, incidentally, on Halloween.
Mm,
So it got its first radio airing on Capital Radio on the 31st of October 1975. But the song is all about Freddie, who wrote it, selling his soul. When you go to the midsection, the operatic section, that represents a spiritual battle in the heavenly realm between angels and demons, God and the devil. And both sides are battling for Freddie's soul. And when Freddie says earlier in the song, Mama, I just killed a man, he's talking about himself.
mm,
He's talking about having killed the old version of himself. It's an egoic death. And he's been reborn because he took the deal and he's been offered this major success. But it comes at the cost of his soul, which is why he says, I killed a man. And so in the middle section, you've got the spiritual forces going back and forth. And eventually the forces of good win out. And they're the ones that get Freddie's soul back. And that's what Bohemian Rhapsody is all about. It's very clear when you approach the lyrics from that perspective, it all slots into place and makes a whole load of sense. So, yes, the selling of your soul is, in my view, a very real thing, not just literal.
have you heard of Donald Marshall?
Yes.
Yeah, so he's been saying for, well, since 2012 when he first started speaking that selling your soul is giving the Illuminati or the people that run Hollywood the permission to clone you and then do whatever they like with the clone.
Yeah.
And then obviously if you don't toe the line, they can get rid of you and the clone steps in. Where are you with that?
It does seem like a bit of a stretch to me. I'm not really down with Donald Marshall's claims. He strikes me as somebody that's been mind controlled. And when you've been mind controlled, all kinds of beliefs can be implanted in your mind, and you can speak them, fully believing them to be true, but actually you're running a program. So that could be what's going on. You know, the claims are pretty wild and out there, but by the same token, I can't necessarily dismiss it 100% because I've seen some very strange, very bizarre, very out there things during the course of my research, which I've initially rejected. And later, I've had to come to accept that there is actually validity to this idea. 10 years ago, a bit more probably 12 years ago, I would have still accepted that we live on a spinning ball hurtling through the infinite vacuum of space in 4 different directions at once, with 666 endlessly encoded into the measurements, and yet we don't feel a thing. These days, I think differently. My current take on that whole subject area would have been outrageous to me 12 years ago, but I'm on board with it all now because of what I've seen and experienced and all the evidence that I've looked at. I've had to change my mind on so many things. So I'm not going to say Donald Marshall is completely wrong, uh, but I'll just say that at this point in time, his ideas don't resonate with me.
I'm kind of at a point where I've seen so much and been exposed to so much that I've stopped believing anything I'm told by the mainstream, and nothing's off the table anymore. If someone came to me with the most outlandish claim, I wouldn't dismiss it, whereas I would have done a few years ago.
Hmm.
Um,
I
but
think it's quite possible that it's possible that it's not possible to know anything for sure,
mm,
apart from that which we have experienced ourselves
mm,
or seen with our own eyes, so that there could be no doubt about it. But when it comes to something like the alleged cloning of celebrities, we can't prove either way whether that goes on or not. So if you're going to be truly open minded about everything, it has to remain on the table as a possibility. It doesn't seem a very likely one to me, but it still remains a possibility. And I think if you're a genuine truth seeker, you have to acknowledge that there are many things about which we just can't know anything. We can't
mm.
know the truth. This is solipsism. And that's a really dirty word within the sort of truth seeking community because people will say, no, no, there's absolute truth in creation and there's natural law and there's all these things that we can observe. But I don't think it's so bad to be solipsistic, which is admitting that we can't really know anything.
Mm.
Wasn't it? Is it Plato who's supposed to have said wisdom is, or is it Socrates? Wisdom is knowing how little we know. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like the more you know you don't know. So the deeper
Yeah.
you get into research, the murkier the waters become. I
Mm.
made this mistake with the Paul McCartney research, the Paul is dead stuff. When I first started out on that, I thought, well, it'll be easy to put this one to bed one way or the other. I've just got to look at the evidence and it will bear itself out. But the more I got into it, the more confused I got, the more confounded I got, the more information I started drowning in. And I realized that you can't actually prove that the original Paul McCartney died. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence and cryptic clues and symbolic suggestions that he did, but you can't actually prove it in a way that would be accepted in a court of law, so called law. So you have to stick with what you can show, what you can prove. And when it comes to Paul McCartney, it can be shown that there have been at least two individuals playing the public role of Paul McCartney. Of that, we can be sure. All you got to do is look at the photographs, look at the film footage, and there's all the proof you need. Does
There was
that
a
prove
high.
does that prove the original Paul died? No, it doesn't. But it also shows that we've not been looking at one singular Paul McCartney all these decades. There's been at least two.
And they introduced Billy Shears in Sergeant Pepper, didn't they? And also, and I might be wrong here, but from around that time, was that when they stopped actually doing live performances? Because there was a significant height difference between Billy and Paul.
Well, exactly that. I mean, this is a very valuable piece of evidence for those who claim that Paul became Billy Shears and was replaced. Well, he quite clearly was. Uh, Again, you can't prove that Paul died, but you can prove he was replaced.
Mm,
And it is interesting timing because, according to the myth, the legend, the original Paul died on the 11th of September, 1966, 9/11/66.
mm.
And it's a fact that the Beatles played their last proper live show on the 29th of August, 1966, in Candlestick Park, San Francisco. From that point, they became a studio only band. The only performance they did beyond that point was the famous rooftop gig on top of their Apple building in
Yes.
London. And that wasn't a proper concert because it was just the film crew up there. There wasn't an
Mm.
audience. And as you say, there was a perceived height difference between the replacement McCartney and the original one. There's actually photographs of both Pauls stepping out with Jane Asher. And seemingly both Pauls dated Jane Asher. So Jane must have known. She must have been in on it, and
Yeah.
probably Dr. Richard Asher was in on it as well.
Mm.
There's pictures where Paul's roughly the same height as Jane, and then there's other pictures where he's towering above her towards the end of their relationship. So the Beatles became a studio only band from autumn 1966 onwards, exactly the time we're told the original Paul checked out and the replacement guy came in.
Where are you with Michael Jackson?
It's very difficult to call it with Michael Jackson. What I will say is, I don't accept that he was guilty of the stuff that he's said to have been guilty of. Those cases that were brought against him smack of a smear campaign to stop him speaking out and to serve as a reminder of who he's dealing with and what they're capable of. Because at that time, Michael had started to become quite outspoken about
Mm.
the nature of the music industry, specifically about the Sony Corporation, to which he was signed. And he was saying some pretty unflattering things about Sony and about Tommy Mottola, the one time CEO of Sony. So it's clear to see how he would have made an enemy of the record labels and how he would have been uh, not a particularly desirable individual to have around. So I think a couple of warning shots were fired over his bow to warn him off, and he kept on speaking out. So eventually he had to be removed. That's my feelings on the subject. Are we going to go there with Dave Dave?
Yes, if you want to. Yeah, yeah.
So, in the
I've
wake of
mhm.
Michael's apparent passing, 25th of June, 2009, 25th of June is anti Christmas. So, the Satanists that control the industry invert everything, they put everything in reverse. So, whereas the rest of us celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, because it's recognizing the rising of the sun after 3 symbolic days of death in the tomb. So, the sun reaches its lowest point on the horizon in what's referred to as the Northern Hemisphere on the night of 21st going into the 22nd of December. And then after 3 symbolic days of death, it rises again. The sun is risen. That reminds me of something. And then it begins its journey very gradually, very slowly towards its high point in the sky. So at Christmas, we're celebrating the symbolic rebirth of the sun and the cycle of renewal and rebirth. Satanists celebrate the opposite, which is the sun having reached its apex, its high point in the sky, and then after 3 days, it gradually starts to decline or symbolically die. So, because Satanists and dark occultists are all about death, this is a fitting date for them. So, that's the date that Michael Jackson died. It's also George Michael's birthday. George Michael, who was a Sony label mate of Michael's, checked out on Christmas Day, 25th of December in 2016. George Michael's sister, Melanie, died on Christmas Day, 2019, 3 years after him. So that's quite unlucky, isn't it? Unless this is another example of matrix coding, the mathematical nature of the core base state of this realm playing itself out in various ways and causing things to happen on certain dates. That's probably another discussion. It's a discussion I have in my so called God videos. But Michael Jackson, shortly after he's said to have died, they wheeled out an individual who was called Dave, real name David Rothenberg. And he's said to have been a burns victim. He was set on fire as a child by his abusive father, so the story goes, suffered horrific burns, had to undergo reconstructive surgery. So this guy turns up on a Larry King CNN
Yeah.
broadcast, and many people remarked on how much he sounded like Michael Jackson when he spoke, and of how, with a little bit of imagination, you could picture Michael lying below these layers of, makeup, prosthetic makeup. So I don't know. I mean, it's another one that I can't necessarily dismiss. He did
Mm.
sound like Michael, like Bob Joyce sounds like Elvis. But again, could this be a story that's put out there to make people like us sound crazy?
Mm.
So if we were ever to make the claim that that could be Michael, his death was fate, we sound crazy to people. And therefore, anything else we've ever had to say is made to sound crazy. And the entire body of our work can therefore be dismissed and thrown out as baseless and without any value.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I found that interview very strange because he took control of the interview, immediately went to defend Michael, saying he's never done anything wrong. He's a really good person. You don't really know him like I do. We've been friends since my childhood. We've spent so much time together. And all they rustle up are some photographs of a kid who'd suffered severe burns with Michael Jackson in hospital years earlier. And we'd never seen Dave mentioned or photographed with Michael since. So I kind of smelt a bit of a rat. But Michael did go out and dress up as a burns victim quite a lot, didn't he? And he'd cover his
Well, he
face
was a
and
Burns victim. There was that
yeah,
incident
but
where his hair caught fire
the
while he was filming
Pepsi.
the Pepsi commercial.
Mm,
And it's interesting because from that point on, his appearance started to change.
mm,
So he'd been a recognizable black man up to that point. But
mm,
then, obviously, towards the end of his career, he'd become pale and white.
mm.
And you can chart the gradual changing in his appearance, which all started from the time of that time when his hair caught fire. So he
Yeah.
was a Burns victim. So, is there an element of mockery there? I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of wondered that. And he went to, and I'm sure it was Usher. Someone corrected me on this, but I'm sure it was Usher. He was somewhere like Vegas and he bumped into Usher, or Usher bumped into him. And Michael had hired a cinema for the afternoon. And there were some kids going. I think they worked with certain people. And he said to him, "Would you like to come with me? I've booked this cinema. We're going to go and see a film. You can come with me." And while they were sat there, he kept saying, "Oh, Michael this, Michael that." He said, "Will you please call me Dave?"
Oh, is that on film?
Yeah, yeah. Usher was interviewed, yeah, about meeting Michael and being told to call him Dave in public. Just call me Dave.
Wow.
And I'm
Okay.
just connecting all these dots. But like you say, that it's difficult because sometimes one thing that I keep getting hit with, and I know we're running out of time, but one thing I keep getting hit with is every time I talk about a celebrity. And it doesn't matter whether it's and celebrity is the wrong word because I'm not celebrating these people in any way. But if I mentioned a couple of days ago Princess Diana, and a few days before that I mentioned that I'd been up to Iconic and I'm working with Gareth and Jamie Ike on a project, and I'd been chatting to David, and I'm constantly hit with Princess Diana's an invert. She was born male. David Icke was born female. This person constantly hit with that at the moment.
Princess Diana became David Furnish. Have you heard that
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Hmm.
I'm getting this all the time, and so the sort of answer that I've now programmed into my brain is I cannot have this conversation or give you an opinion because I haven't been given access to their medical records.
Well, exactly. All these people that claim celebrities and public figures are the opposite gender to how they're
Mm,
presented, how would you ever prove that? The only
mm,
way you could prove it is to go up to them, whip down their pants, and
mm.
see what lies beneath.
Yeah.
Short of that, how are you ever going to prove it? And I know a lot of these claims are nonsense. I know for a fact that they are, because there was this individual, don't remember his name, not even important, but a few months back, he'd taken a picture of me and David Icke, a time when I met David. I'm sat there at a table with him, and he'd drawn triangles on our faces.
Yes.
And he said that the triangle showed that the proportion between the different features of the face showed that we were both female to male transgenders. Now, I don't know about David, I'm pretty sure about him, but I know about myself. I'm the world's
Yeah.
leading expert on myself. And I know that I'm not a female to male transgender. And from that, I know that this individual is full of shit.
Mm,
And I can expand that out and say that a lot of these people that are making these claims must also be full of shit because there's a lot
mm.
of unfounded stuff going on out there.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of attention seeking. People just want to sound controversial, come up with a theory that nobody else is putting out there. Maybe they do it for views. I don't know.
Mm,
Maybe they do it for fame. Maybe it makes them feel good about themselves. But there's so much diversion, so much nonsense.
mm,
And that's why it has to be okay for us to say, I don't know about anything. It's okay to admit you don't know about a subject because there's so much disinformation, so much misinformation, so much diversion that anyone coming out and saying, I know the absolute truth about everything, my belief system, my method is the only way, how can you place any stock in anyone making that claim?
Yeah, I totally
You
agree.
can't. Nobody can know everything
Mm,
because so much is unknowable in this realm. And it's okay to say that.
yeah. You mentioned a quote by Plato earlier on, and I use one all the time by Marcus Aurelius, and that was that all I know for certain is that I know nothing at all.
There you go.
And the more I dig, the more questions I end up with. But I know you've got to shoot off in a second. But one thing I wanted to say to you is when you were chatting with to Richard Vobes, you struck a chord with me regarding Kindle. And I've often wondered if what I submitted to Kindle a year or so ago is what the person who buys the ebook is reading now. And I've
Right.
got my suspicions on that.
Right. Yeah. I think I mentioned to Richard that there's a clue in the naming of Kindle because a Kindle means burning. It's like the idea of book burning. The movie Fahrenheit 451, which is the temperature at which paper allegedly burns. That film was all about a dystopian futuristic society. So this one then,
Yes.
where where books had been outlawed, and you had marshals whose job it was to round up all the books and throw them on big fires. So Amazon call their company Kindle when they're putting out books. That's a strange choice of name, isn't it? I think the only way you can be sure that what you've put into a book is what people are getting to read, and it's not been altered or tampered with in any way, is through printed books,
Mm,
physical books that you can actually hold in your hand. That's the true value of putting a book out there. The fact that you yourself can die, but what you've put into that book could potentially live on for decades or even centuries. Your
mm,
words live on beyond you. You mentioned Marcus Aurelius. How long's he been dead? But we're
yeah.
still using his words,
Mm,
you know? So it's just another reminder of how so much was actually better when we had an analog society.
oh, absolutely.
We live in a digital electronic society now, which is where Kindle comes in, which is where AI comes in, which is where digital ID comes in. It's not good, is it? So
No.
much about it is not good. And so many of the problems and the drawbacks weren't there when we had a society where things were done in analog form and in a much more authentic, hands on manner.
I've got one last question for you, and that is if you could bring somebody back for an hour from the past that we believe to have gone, who would it be?
Hmm.
And you can interrogate these people, truth serum the works.
I would probably have to say John Lennon,
Oh, that's a good
because
one.
John Lennon is somebody who I've been fascinated with for most of my life because he was such a deeply complex character. Even before I got into this sort of research, I used to listen to him in interviews and listen to his lyrics and his songs, and I thought, wow, there's so much to this guy, so many different sides. He was so self-contradictory. You know, he wasn't an all-round nice guy. He was reportedly abusive to his first wife, Cynthia, neglectful of his son, Julian. He used to mock disabled people in concerts. But then you flip that around and he put some amazingly empowering messages into his music, and he appeared to be genuine in his activism. Uh, and so, if I could bring him back, I would ask him all about this. I would ask him if he was inducted into an MK Ultra mind control program, which I suspect he was. And of course, I'd ask him about the truth regarding Paul McCartney. I'd
Mm.
say, John, I need to know. Cut the bullshit. Is that Paul? Is that Billy? Did the real Paul die? You know, tell me. I need
Mm.
to know. All these questions I would have for him. And another overriding question would be, what the hell were you doing with Yoko? You could have had any woman you wanted in the world and you ended up with her. What's that all about?
Wasn't it Paul that introduced them?
Uh, Reportedly so, yeah,
Yeah,
at an art
allegedly.
exhibition.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you giving up your time to talk to me.
No worries, mate. And I'm going to be chatting to you again. You're going to come on my podcast, Good
Mm.
Vibrations, and we're going to talk about your main subject areas on that. So we'll have another conversation there.
If people want to read your work, where is the best place to get it?
So my main hub website is djmarkdevlin.com. And from that, you've got links through to everywhere else. So all my books are on Amazon. And I know a lot of people don't like Amazon, but if you're outside of the UK, it honestly is the best way of getting hold of my books
Yeah,
because I've tried posting books out and they always go missing and it costs a fortune, takes bloody ages. If you're not in the UK, just get my books on Amazon. If you are in the UK, I can post them out. So just drop me an email, markdevlin2022 at protonmail.com. I've got videos on YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble going back many, many years. I do podcasts. I've got Good Vibrations, which is conversation based, The Sound of Freedom, which is a conscious music podcast, The Sound of Now, which is my weekly uplifting house music show. And all of those are accessible from that main website. So if people just want to go to djmarkdevlin.com or to Amazon and put my name in there, that's where you'll find me.
brilliant. I'll put some links in the description.
Yeah, cheers.
But thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And I'll speak to you again very soon.
Likewise, yeah. Talk to you again soon. Cheers.
Take care, Mark.
All the best. See ya.
Bye for now.